Like the title says, I can't make up my mind about Mega Man 3. This is a game beloved by so many people, considered one of the best games on the NES alongside Mega Man 2. So why didn't I like it all that much the last time I played it? Yeah, my history with this game is pretty strange. On my first Classic Series playthrough, after finishing all 11 games, many of which I really liked, Mega Man 3 still came out on top. And it wasn't close either. It was easily my favorite NES game with absolutely no contest, and ranked among my favorite 2D platformers of all time. And I held on to that opinion for years, so my second playthrough came as a huge surprise. Excited to replay one of my favorite games, I don't know, something felt off. There were so many issues I didn't notice the first time around, and this time they actually prevented me from enjoying the game. Disappointed, I moved it from my absolute favorite in the Classic Series down to 3rd or 4th worst. And I wasn't alone either. Two of my favorite YouTubers rated it their least favorite in the series, even below Mega Man 1. Well, it happens. All I could really do was move on and keep enjoying the games I did like. But hey, I'm doing this review series now. There's always room for a reevaluation. So let's do it. Is Mega Man 3 the worst game in the series? The best? Or somewhere in between? Let's find out. Like with last time, let's start with what this game adds to the series. Mega Man 3 actually changes a lot, even more than 2 did. First off, I have to mention the controls because my god, what an improvement. 3 continues what 2 started by perfecting the small little details in how Mega Man moves. The instant you start or stop moving, Mega Man immediately stops as well. This means there's no lag time at all, and you're completely in charge of what happens. Platforming mistakes are almost always your fault instead of the game's fault, and everything just feels so much snappier and better to play. A few other wrinkles have been ironed out as well. For example, Mega Man moves up ladders quite a bit faster, so those sections are a lot less of a pace breaker. They even added a new frame of animation for him finishing his climb, and tiny details like that matter a lot for the 3rd game in a series. I'm not sure if I'm right about this, but the jump also feels just that slight bit better in a way I can't quite describe. This game's biggest new addition though is the slide, which is pretty self-explanatory, and I love the way it's implemented here. When you start a slide by pressing down and jump, you move faster than your normal walk. So at its most basic level, it's at least a way to save some time during long linear stretches. But even more important, you duck down to half the normal height. This means you can go under some projectiles with the right timing, and even if you don't do this all that much, it's still a great option. And that especially applies to the boss fights. Bosses like Top Man and Magnet Man are very intentionally designed with this move in mind. Since you're more mobile now, they are too, and these fights as a whole just feel a lot more dynamic now. There are also a few areas where you can only get through by sliding, and these sections are really fun every single time. No wonder this move became a series mainstay. Right? Speaking of the main bosses, I think these are a decent improvement. Like I said before, the Mega Man 1 fights are either very simple and easy like Bomb Man, or practically impossible without their weakness and just horribly designed, like Elec Man and Fireman. In that game, I tend to prefer the easier bosses, and Cutman and Bomb Man are decently fun to beat. In Mega Man 2, I don't really like any of the main bosses all that much. Weaknesses absolutely demolish every single boss in that game, and only a few of them are realistically beatable without either the weakness or an E-tank. However, at least these types of bosses make the boss rush pretty decent, and the Wily stage bosses are a bit better. In 3, I can finally say I like a majority of the bosses. Magnet Man and Top Man are easy, like I said, but still pose some level of challenge while having interesting and well-telegraphed patterns. Hard Man is pretty tough even with his weakness, and Sparkman, Needleman, and Snake Man play more like the Mega Man 2 bosses, without feeling like there's quite as much chaos happening on the screen. And Snake Man and Sparkman have interesting arenas that add meaningfully to how the boss plays out. I still don't think the bosses here are overall amazing or anything, but they're at least an improvement. One thing I didn't bring up last time is that unlike in Mega Man 1, the boss weaknesses don't make quite as much intuitive sense in the games after that. I mean, I can't really blame the developers here since they can't just do the same few stage themes every single time. In Mega Man 2, I think a decent amount of the logic still makes sense though. Woodman is weak to Metalman and Heatman, Quickman is weak to Flashman's Time Stopper, etc. Some of them don't make any intuitive sense though. Like, I guess Airman is weak to leaves because photosynthesis or something? Sure. In Mega Man 3, we're just barely holding on to the tiniest little shred of logic. I guess Gemini Man is weak to the search snake because it searches for the correct one. I guess. Hard Man is weak to magnets, I guess that makes sense. But can someone please explain to me why Needle Man is weak to a Gemini laser? Or Shadow Man being weak to Mega Man spinning like a top? I don't really think it matters, but it's pretty funny to imagine what the developers were thinking here. So what else is different? Well, the special items have been reworked into Rush, Mega Man's robot dog. And I mean, of course that makes them way better. In this game you have Rush Coil, Rush Jet, and Rush Marine. Coil is fantastic, acting as a spring you can use for massive height at any time. Because you have it from the very beginning, every single stage is able to make good use of it too. This is just a great addition to the series. Jet, though, is absurdly broken, letting you just skip over everything and fly in any direction. I like the idea, but it's just way too good here, and the sections that force you to use it are honestly pretty terrible. It probably tells you something about me as a player, though, that I only really used Rush Jet when it was required or to get optional items. I'm sure another player would have a similar feeling towards Rush Jet as I did towards the Metal Blade in the last game, but it just works for me personally. To give a quick analogy for any Zelda fans, imagine playing through Tears of the Kingdom and learning about the hoverbike, which lets you just fly anywhere you want at any time. I knew that was an option, but I would just never choose to use it. I think me choosing not to use Rush is essentially the same situation. It doesn't mean that the problem doesn't exist, it just didn't affect me personally. And then Rush Marine is just Jet, but exclusive to water and with way less energy, so it's very situational and not that impressive. While not all of these are that great, I think Rush Coil is perfect and is more than enough to replace all of the previous special items, so I think it's an improvement. And I might as well also mention that E-Tanks don't get reset by getting a game over anymore, which is a change I'm very mixed on. Part of the challenge of Mega Man 2 was that these are so rare, and keeping them for later was a very deliberate choice. This change makes it much easier to brute force your way through bosses. If you really want to stock up on a bunch of E-Tanks, that's an actual possibility now, and I don't really like that. Seriously, by the time I was at the Wily stages, I had like 4 of them in reserve, which I don't think should be so easy to achieve. But I think I know the reason why they made this change, and that's the other huge new addition, the Dock Robot. So once you beat the 8 main stages, before getting to Wily's castle you have 4 more stages to play through, which are remixed and much harder versions of previous ones. This entire idea is apparently very contentious, but I have to say that I unambiguously love it. While many people consider this to be blatant padding, I completely disagree, and I actually wish more games in the series did something like this. If there's anything wrong with this setup, in my opinion, it's completely down to the execution. In each of these stages you fight the Dock Robot twice, which uses one of the 8 Mega Man 2 boss powers. That is such a cool idea. I do think this was maybe a missed opportunity to add the weapons from that game into this one, but I also completely get why they didn't. Still though, I do find it just a bit disappointing that you don't get anything at all from beating these stages. Part of what makes a Mega Man game work for me is getting some kind of new option whenever you beat a stage. But the issues are with the levels themselves. They're on a completely new level of difficulty for the series, which is actually the main thing that I disliked on my previous playthrough. And a lot of that comes down to the Dock Robot bosses themselves, which honestly just do way too much damage for their own good. Some of them are brutal even after you figure out the correct weapon to use. They mirror exactly what the corresponding boss from Mega Man 2 does, but the robot itself has a huge hitbox, making them really hard to avoid. And they can kill you in like 4 or 5 hits, so you really can't take your time in defeating them. Or, of course, you can use an E-Tank, and these bosses are actually why I think they changed the way they work. Some of the stages themselves have a couple terrible moments as well, but this time around I actually really enjoyed most of them, with some exceptions. For a more experienced player, the stages present a tough challenge that's really satisfying once you figure it out. What I do think is unambiguously bad though, is that the first Dock Robot in each stage has no checkpoint before it. This means if you die, you just go right back to the start of the stage. That's just a bit ridiculous and really only wastes your time. The last thing I wanted to mention before we get into talking about the stages themselves is the aesthetic design. I already said Mega Man 2 was a fantastic looking game for the time, but Mega Man 3 makes it look almost mediocre by comparison. Seriously, this entire game looks unbelievably good for the NES, with amazing looking enemies that have way more frames of animation than before, absolutely beautiful and varied stage designs, etc. It's everything I loved about the visuals of 2, just cranked up a notch. They even throw in a few tiny little cutscenes, which barely matter, but they're still nice to see. Also, I cannot get enough of the stage select menu with Mega Man's eyes looking at the boss you've selected. I seriously love that so much. My only real issue here is with the UI. They replaced the weapon select menu with a completely new design, which looks nice but is confusing to navigate. It makes it really hard to find what you need, and also easy to accidentally use an E-Tank. Oh yeah, and how could I forget about the music? Yeah, remember how I said the music of Mega Man 2 is the best thing about that game? Well, somehow 3's is even better. I'm not a music expert or anything, but this soundtrack uses the NES sound chip in a totally unique way that doesn't sound like anything else I've ever heard. While 2 has a few songs that sound surprisingly emotional for what they are, 3 ditches that style for a much bouncier and more upbeat selection. Every single song in this entire game, with only a few very small exceptions, is just complete perfection. I can't even choose a favorite because all of them are so good. I love Hard Man, Snake Man, Gemini Man, Shadow Man, and the stage select theme the most, but really all of it is great and there isn't a single song I dislike or am even indifferent to. Even the title screen music is absolutely amazing, despite the fact that almost nobody will even hear it since there's no intro cutscene. My least favorite stage themes are Top Man and Needle Man, and even then I still really like them. I do think the absolute peak of Mega Man 2's music is slightly higher, but this is way more consistent. Yep, we've found it, my favorite NES soundtrack ever. And I don't see that changing, no matter how many more NES games I play. But wow, that took longer than expected. Mega Man 3 really has a lot to talk about, and most of it so far has been pretty positive. Let's finally take a look at the stages themselves and see what we're dealing with. Like my previous 2 playthroughs, I started with Magnet Man. He isn't the easiest first choice, but is more than doable, and I love his weapon, which shoots forward then turns towards an enemy, doing tons of damage. This stage is a ton of fun, being very balanced with some decently challenging enemies. There are some disappearing block sections near the end, and they're actually my favorite parts of the stage, posing a challenge without being too long or annoying. Wow, disappearing blocks being fun, who could have guessed? There are magnets in a few places which pull Mega Man towards them and make platforming pretty interesting. I like that they're still used sparingly so they don't get annoying. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is that a bunch of stages in this game make you fight Proto Man, Mega Man's brother. They kinda have a tiny bit of a story with him being mysterious or whatever, but what I do care about is that these fights are extremely boring. He just has one single pattern he repeats over and over again, and shows up way too often to remain interesting. Lastly though, Magnet Man himself is a very cool boss who, like his stage, poses a challenge but is nowhere near unfair. This stage is awesome and we're off to a great start. Next up I played Hard Man, who's weak to the magnet missile. Unfortunately this is a pretty big downgrade from the previous stage. It's just way too straightforward, with no interesting set pieces or platforming sections to speak of. All of the enemies are pretty annoying too, especially these monkey enemies that jump all over the place and have way too much health. The boss is really hard without his weakness, but doesn't immediately lose if you have it, and his attacks are pretty tough to dodge. Definitely not my favorite stage, but at least it's not actively bad. Top Man is next, and I think this is intended to be the first stage you play, mostly because Top Man himself is very easy and teaches you how to use the slide pretty well. The stage is great too, with a cool and unique aesthetic. I'm not even really sure what it's supposed to be, but to me it almost looks like a greenhouse with a bunch of spiky plants poking through the glass, or something like that. There's a repeated mini-boss, this cat that throws bouncing balls of yarn at you. I love the ending too, which is a bunch of spinning tops moving up and down over a pit. It's a cool and memorable way to introduce you to the boss. Top Man's weapon is... how do I even explain it? Let's call it an enigma, but we'll get to that when it comes up later. Shadow Man's stage is really cool and has always been one of my favorites. You start off on a platform with a red waterfall flowing over it and have to fall down to the actual stage. And that stage is really cool, with fantastic enemy placement that makes you work to beat it, including these enemies that suck the light out of the room when they're on screen. The platforming in the second half is great as well, making you think about what you do at all times, which is what I expect and want out of a Mega Man stage. I also love how this stage looks, there really isn't anything else like it. Unfortunately though, fighting the boss is really weird because of Top Man's weapon, which is a close range spin. This just doesn't make any sense in a game where all enemies inflict touch damage, but beyond that it also literally doesn't function as intended. Sometimes it uses up all of its ammo in one attack, sometimes it instantly kills the enemy. I literally have no idea what's going on here. Luckily though, Shadow Man's weapon is absolutely amazing. It's this game's replacement for the Metal Blade, but heavily nerfed, and I do mean heavily. It has less than half the ammo, you can only throw one at a time, you can't throw down or diagonally down, and its range is limited. Somehow though, even with all those drawbacks, it's still the best weapon in the game, and is a perfect showcase of why I don't love the Metal Blade in Mega Man 2. The Shadow Blade is just balanced in a way that lets the other weapons shine, and I ended up using over half of them pretty consistently. While the weapon system in 2 isn't objectively bad or anything, I just prefer this way of doing things. Sparkman has another really good stage. There are some great platforming moments and interesting enemies to beat, like this section at the end where the platforms rise up to the ceiling while these screw enemies fly onto the screen. That was really fun. The boss is pretty decent, but also a little too easy if you have the weakness. My main issue with this stage though is the falling blocks you have to break by shooting. These are just not fun to deal with without a powerful weapon like the Hard Knuckle. They just serve to either slow you down, hurt your finger from pressing the shoot button too fast, or waste your ammo. Otherwise though, I like the stage a lot. But next up is Snake Man, and oh boy am I excited because god do I love this stage. First off, the whole thing being themed around snakes leads to great and incredibly unique theming, very visually interesting backgrounds and enemy designs, cool platforming sections, awesome combat encounters, basically everything I could ever want. And then it throws a cool twist at you and suddenly you climb up a tall ladder. Now it becomes a level where you hop between a bunch of towers and the swirling platforms that come out of them, high up above the rest of the stage. The enemies are really cool too, like the snake heads and these pole vaulters that jump over you then run backwards, which give you a great opportunity to use your slide. And then the boss is pretty good, but still not my absolute favorite. It feels kind of like a Mega Man 2 boss, although I still like it a lot more like I said before. All this is to say though, this is one of my favorite stages in the entire classic series, and easily the best one we've seen so far. Man, talking about this is making me want to go replay it again. But on to the next one. Gemini Man is another beautiful looking stage, with this really cool space background and crystal platforms at the beginning, before switching to this colorful section that I struggle to even describe since it's so unique. The artists working on this one were actual geniuses, because man is this stage awesome to look at. Unfortunately though, the intro section isn't very fun gameplay wise, mostly because it just takes too long and has a bunch of annoying pace-breaking enemies. I just think this didn't need to last for an entire minute. 15 to 20 seconds would have gotten the point across just fine. And then the second half has these weird egg blocks that release these space tadpole things when you shoot them. After carving your way through the eggs, you get a tough section where you jump on small platforms over water as these fish robots launch rockets up at you. Okay, seriously though, who even came up with all these ideas? What other game has anything even remotely similar to this? I love this stage just for how unique it is, and it's also pretty tough, making this one of the most memorable stages in the whole series. The boss kind of sucks though. I mean, it's really tough without the weakness, you automatically win with the weakness, yeah, you know the drill. And lastly, we have Needle Man. This is one of the less amazing stages if you ask me. These hedgehog enemies are kind of annoying, but at least the others are pretty cool. Like these cannons you can only attack when they open to shoot at you. I do really like this sliding section, where the needles come out of the floor and ceiling, and you have to slide back and forth to get the right timing. Honestly though, that's all I really remember from the stage. The boss is okay, but it's pretty hard without its weakness, and since the Gemini laser is completely worthless, I guess it's hard even with the weakness. So that was a fantastic lineup of main stages. Easily the best in the series so far, and I don't even think it's much of a question. But what about the rest of the game? Because next up is the Doc Robot. So yeah, once the main stages are complete, the Doc Robot levels just kind of appear on the stage select screen. The order you play them in doesn't really matter, so I just did Shadow Man first. And man, this stage is absolutely brutal. Almost the whole level has some kind of instant death trap nearby, and the platforming is extremely unforgiving. There's this section where you have to jump over a bottomless pit on these red platforms. They'll open up and drop you to your demise if you stand on them for more than a few frames. But honestly, now that I've played this game a few times and know how to deal with them, I love this section. But the bosses are probably the two hardest in the entire game, practically requiring E-tanks even once you find their weakness. And if you die on them, you have a good amount of stage to replay as well, because of the terrible checkpoint placement I talked about. This is one of the hardest stages in the entire Classic series, and this time around, it's one of my favorites too. Except for maybe the bosses and the checkpoints, of course. And on the flip side, the remixed Needleman stage is easily the worst part of the entire game. The first half is fine, I guess, but after you beat the first Doc Robot, the second half is so weird. You have to fly on Rush Jet through this long section, and you have to get a bunch of energy pickups along the way to keep going. But see, one interesting quirk of the Classic series so far is that energy pickups don't respawn when you die. So if you die during this section before the final boss, you're literally out of luck and have to restart because the section becomes completely unbeatable. This is absolutely terrible design and probably the closest this game gets to a Boo Beam Trap or Magnet Beam level disaster. At least if you've played this game before, you'll know to use up your E-tanks if you need to get through the section without getting soft-locked. Still, it's insane to me that a game like this, which up until now has been pretty tightly designed, would have such an obvious mistake in its level design like this. And no, I don't think this is up to interpretation. This is objectively a mistake in the level design, and I doubt anyone would call this a good decision. Well, now that we're through that garbage, the remixed Sparkman stage is pretty good, with great platforming sections just like the original stage, and some great enemy placement as well. I once again hate the falling blocks you have to break, and they're even worse here since it's right next to an instant death pit. And thankfully both bosses here aren't too hard, so this stage gets a pass from me. And the last Doc Robot level is Gemini Man, which is kind of a weird update. The first half is just a harder and more boring version of the first part of the original. The Flashman Doc Robot absolutely sucks too. Afterwards though, the stage is completely different, with the Rush Marine section being surprisingly easy and straightforward. And then there are these crawling bug enemies that weren't in the original stage, and they're pretty cool since they crawl along the ladders, which is pretty interesting. Not a bad stage and not too difficult either, but I definitely prefer the original. So after all the Doc Robots are done, you get a stage where all you do is fight Proto Man, but again. I really don't get why. Were 4 fights not enough? Anyway, after that you go to the Wily stages and, what happened here? These stages are so confusing. There are 6 entire stages like in Mega Man 2, but this time around they're so unbelievably easy and literally shower you in extra lives, weapon energy, E-tanks, and health. Did they not trust the player to be able to beat normal stages? I literally don't understand this at all. Seriously, these stages are all so easy and simple that I don't remember anything about most of them. So here's what I did remember, I guess. Wily 1 is, okay. There are like 2 platforming sections that are admittedly pretty fun, and then the easiest boss in Mega Man history. Wily 2 starts off with a section where literally nothing can even hurt you, and then throws the yellow devil at you again. This time though, it's way easier and is actually kind of fun. The slide lets you go under some of the harder blocks to dodge, and you have way more time to react and better controls. Then Wily 3 is a stage, that's about it. Seriously, I didn't remember a single thing that happened here. And Wily 4 is a decent boss rush. I'm glad that like Mega Man 2, it's pretty quick to beat and kind of fun. With the 300 E-tanks you probably have by now, it's also impossible to lose. And next up is actually a really cool Wily fight, even if it's a bit too easy. You have to defeat the turret on the bottom, then go under the machine itself to throw the Shadow Blade upwards. I like that a lot, even if it doesn't make much of a lasting impression. And in the final stage, you fight against Gamma, this massive robot. It looks really cool, but... oh. I guess you don't fight against Gamma. Never mind. And yep, that's the end of the game. So that was pretty weird. Apparently Mega Man 3 was a heavily rushed game, and yeah, it kinda shows. The first half of the game is honestly perfect. Then even though I do like the Doc Robot stages on the whole, a few cracks start forming there. Then, the game just completely falls apart by the end. The difficulty curve of the game follows a similar trajectory, being very balanced at first, then very hard, then laughably easy. Not really what I'm looking for in that respect. And the development issues show in other ways too, like the blank title screen and the clearly unfinished Gemini Man Doc Robot stage. Hey, maybe that's why the robot dog is called Rush. Sorry. But anyway, that first half really is amazing. The 8 main stages have fantastic level design on the whole. One thing I noticed on this playthrough is that compared to Mega Man 2, 3's stages have a more consistent structure to them. Half of them are pretty similar, with the main differences being the enemy design, visuals, and a few smaller unique set pieces. Spark Man, Magnet Man, Top Man, Hard Man, and Needle Man all follow what might be considered a bit of a formula. You have a winding room where you go left to right and back again, a room with enemies dropping downstairs, a room where you fight Proto Man, a room where you fight a big enemy in a small room, etc. I can imagine critics of this game would call these stages a bit too similar and formulaic, but in my opinion it's a good formula, and the stages do feel different enough for me. And some of them are still really great stages despite this formula, like Spark Man and Magnet Man. But what really fixes this for me is the rest of the stages, Snake Man, Gemini Man, and Shadow Man. These are all wildly different and add so much variety to the game, with interesting, well thought out gimmicks and extremely unique level design. This means if you happen to get bored of the other stages, these are more than enough to spice up the game. So yeah, I think it's pretty easy to see why my opinions on this game changed so drastically over time. The first time I played it, I loved the first 2/3 of the game so much that the ending didn't bother me at all, I just forgot it even existed. The second time though, I think I just didn't love the Doc Robot levels and got a bit frustrated there, then got disappointed by the lame ending. So what about this time? Well, you probably saw this coming. I'm more than happy to report that I love Mega Man 3 again. I prefer it to Mega Man 2, and while it's fallen from being my favorite in the classic series, it's at least back to being in my top half of what I consider to be a consistently good batch of games. And I honestly couldn't be happier, since something felt off about me not liking this game. But I do have to admit, the ending does still drag it down a bit for me, which I wish I didn't have to say. Seriously, I would kill to play a version of this game that didn't get rushed at all, and I really think that would be one of the greatest Mega Man games ever made. For now though, it's still a lot of fun, but nowhere near perfect. So yeah, that's it for the original trilogy. People often group those games together when they're discussing the NES games, since these are the most well-known of the classic series by far. On the other hand, 4, 5, and 6 were often more overlooked, but nowadays those games are starting to get more of their own fans as well. Next time we'll be continuing this Mega Man marathon. See you then, and thanks for watching.